Visualize a Tomahawk cruise missile. It stretches 18 feet in length and travels at a velocity of 550 miles per hour, capable of reaching a target 1,000 meters distant with remarkable accuracy. This missile represents the vanguard of the United States military's offensive capabilities. While one might perceive only the metal, the explosives, and the jet fuel, the most crucial element remains unseen. Within its intricate guidance system, its delicate wiring, and its specialized power cells, resides approximately 15 kilograms of pure silver, equivalent to roughly 500 ounces. At contemporary market rates, this silver holds a value of $30,000 to $40,000. Relative to the missile's $2 million price tag, this appears insignificant, a mere statistical anomaly. However, therein lies the critical dilemma. Without these 500 ounces of silver, the missile cannot function. This vital component renders the guidance system inoperative, and the power source fails to initiate the engine. Silver transcends its common perception as mere currency or adornment. It is, in fact, a strategic asset. For the past 80 years, America has engaged in conflicts predicated on the assumption of inexhaustible material resources, believing in an unending capacity to construct more vessels, more aircraft, and more projectiles. Yet we are now confronting a disquieting reality. The United States government has depleted its entire strategic silver reserve. The national defense stockpile is entirely empty. Simultaneously, the nation is embroiled in a global rearmament race against countries that have been systematically accumulating silver for decades. This comprehensive four-part investigation will meticulously expose the Pentagon's silver deficit crisis. We will present official government documentation substantiating the depleted state of the stockpile, and elucidate the indispensable role of substantial silver quantities in modern warfare, from satellite technology to underwater ordnance. Furthermore, we will examine the ramifications when the Department of Defense confronts the impossibility of acquiring necessary metals through conventional market channels, leading to potential confiscation rather than purchase. This narrative pits national security interests against individual investment portfolios. To grasp the gravity of this predicament, one must first comprehend the underlying physics. Why does the military favor silver over alternatives like copper or aluminum? Silver stands unrivaled as the paramount conductor of both electricity and heat within the known universe. While copper suffices for a household toaster, where minor heat fluctuations or signal degradation pose no mortal risk, the stakes are infinitely higher for a fighter jet exceeding Mach 2 or a satellite navigating the void of space. In such critical applications, failure is unacceptable. Electrons require the path of least resistance, a metal that resists sparking, resists corrosion, and establishes the most dependable electrical connections possible. That metal is silver. Consider the components of a modern military force. Silver-zinc batteries, utilized in torpedoes and drones, offer an exceptional power-to-weight ratio and enhanced safety compared to lithium-ion alternatives, yet they demand considerable quantities of silver plating. Similarly, the ball bearings within jet engines are frequently electroplated with silver, serving as an exceptional solid lubricant. Should the oil system fail, this silver coating prevents catastrophic engine seizure during flight. Every solar panel on a military satellite, every interconnect, relies on silver. The entirety of the communication infrastructure is dependent on silver-plated radio frequency connectors. The Defense Logistics Agency's designation of silver as a strategic material is not arbitrary. A 21st century military cannot operate with 19th century materials. As weaponry advances, so too does its silver consumption. A tank from World War II utilized minimal silver, whereas a contemporary Abrams tank, a sophisticated computer on tracks, is replete with it. The digitization of warfare has inextricably linked our national security to the availability of this precious metal. Given silver's critical importance, one would naturally assume the United States maintains an extensive stockpile, perhaps hidden beneath a mountain in Colorado, holding billions of ounces for wartime contingencies. Historically, this was indeed the case. During the 1940s and 50s, the United States possessed the largest silver reserves ever known, exceeding 3 billion ounces. This served not only as a medium for coinage but also as a vital resource for the Manhattan Project. However, a subsequent complacency set in. In the 1960s, silver was eliminated from coinage. The government, observing its 3 billion ounce surplus, deemed it superfluous, positing that digital transactions and nuclear deterrence rendered silver obsolete. Consequently, a systematic divestment commenced. For 3 decades, the U.S. government inundated the market with silver through auctions and the minting of commemorative coins, effectively subsidizing its low price by liquidating America's patrimony. By the early 2000s, the Defense Logistics Agency reported the National Defense Silver stockpile as effectively zero, having sold the last ingots and sealed the vaults. Presently, the United States government holds virtually no silver reserves. When the U.S. Mint requires silver for its American Eagle coins, it must procure blanks from private refiners on the open market. Likewise, defense contractor Raytheon must purchase silver from commercial banks for its missile production. We have transitioned from being the Saudi Arabia of silver to a state of dependency. We possess no strategic buffer. Should hostilities erupt tomorrow and supply lines from Mexico and Peru be severed, production at Lockheed Martin would grind to a halt. This brings us to the prevailing logistical model. For the past 30 years, the Pentagon has embraced a corporate strategy of just-in-time delivery, operating under the assumption that global markets would remain consistently functional. The belief was that silver, when needed, could be procured through a simple purchase order and delivered within 48 hours. This approach proves effective during peacetime, with open trade routes and stable prices, but it collapses catastrophically during resource-driven conflicts. We are now witnessing the unraveling of this system. As previously discussed, the commercial sector is rapidly absorbing all available silver, depleting the float. Consequently, when a defense contractor attempts to acquire silver, they find themselves in competition with titans like Apple, Samsung, and Tesla. However, defense contractors operate under the constraints of governmental bureaucracy and fixed-price contracts, making them inherently slower to react. If the price of silver doubles, the contractor incurs losses on the missile, leading to procurement delays as they await price reductions that never materialize. This results in inventory depletion. Reports indicate a lengthening of lead times for military-grade silver components, extending from weeks to months, and a subsequent delay in the delivery of crucial weapon systems. The underlying reason is invariably cited as supply chain issues, a euphemism for an inability to obtain the necessary metal. We have engineered a military apparatus that presumes infinite supply, yet we operate within a global landscape characterized by finite scarcity. The just-in-time military is on the precipice of becoming the too-late military. Now, let us examine our adversaries. Consider China. While the United States was divesting its 3 billion ounces of silver, China was actively acquiring it. For the past 20 years, China has been aggressively accumulating both gold and silver, encouraging its citizenry to hold these metals, establishing extensive state-run refineries, and prohibiting the export of raw silver ore. China comprehends silver's strategic significance, recognizing that in any conflict, the initial action is typically a blockade. Nations that control the physical metal within their borders can sustain the production of missiles and satellites. Those reliant on the open market face defenselessness should that market cease to function. This disparity creates a formidable strategic imbalance. China possesses a substantial war chest of physical silver, while the United States holds a paper obligation from financial institutions. If these financial instruments default or the paper market collapses, China retains the tangible metal for weaponry. The United States, conversely, is left with a potential lawsuit against a financially precarious entity. This represents a national security emergency that is conspicuously absent from congressional discourse, which remains fixated on budgetary allocations and software advancements, rather than the fundamental physical components required to execute national strategy. Therefore, with the stockpile depleted, demand escalating, and adversaries engaged in aggressive hoarding, the United States government faces a crisis. In the subsequent segment, we will delve into the government's response, analyzing Executive Order 12017, America's Supply Chains, a document in which the White House finally acknowledged the threat posed by foreign mineral dependency to national security. We will examine the legal framework established for the seizure of critical materials during emergencies, and explain how the Defense Production Act empowers the President to compel companies to supply silver to the military before fulfilling civilian orders. Additionally, we will explore the prospect of reconstituting a strategic silver reserve, a venture that would necessitate the acquisition of hundreds of millions of ounces from a market already experiencing scarcity. The Pentagon is awakening, and when a large entity stirs within a confined space, others are inevitably displaced. We urge you to stay tuned for Part 2. We are dissecting executive orders. Having absorbed the information from Part 1, you now comprehend the perilous standing of the United States military. We have constructed the most technologically advanced war machine in history, equipping it with silver-zinc batteries, silver-plated bearings, and silver-lined guidance chips, only to liquidate the entire national silver stockpile to address budget deficits in the 1990s. We are navigating a perilous situation without a safety net. Yet the Pentagon, while deliberate, is not oblivious. It employs supply chain analysts and war gamers. In recent years, warning indicators on their internal systems have begun to flash. They have recognized that a conflict in the Pacific or a pandemic-induced shutdown of mines in Peru could halt the production lines for F-35 fighter jets within weeks. In Part 2, we will examine the government's reaction. We will analyze Executive Order 14217, the directive through which the White House officially expressed alarm regarding critical minerals. I will elucidate the Defense Production Act, the legislation granting the President the authority to commandeer your silver supply before it even reaches your doorstep. Furthermore, we will explain why the civilian market is poised to become a secondary consideration in the global silver trade. The government has concluded its selling phase and is preparing to assert control. Let us examine the legal landscape. In February of 2021, the President signed a directive that fundamentally altered the situation. Executive Order 14217, titled America's Supply Chains. While largely overlooked by the public due to its seemingly innocuous title, its text serves as a candid admission by the United States government of its diminished control over essential materials for national survival. This order mandated a 100-day assessment of critical supply chains, encompassing semiconductors, batteries, and essential minerals. The resulting reports painted a stark picture. The Department of Defense indicated that for numerous strategic materials, the United States relies entirely on foreign sources, frequently from nations with adversarial interests. Although the public report emphasizes lithium and cobalt, the underlying principle is directly applicable to silver. Silver functions as a cross-cutting material. While the lithium supply for batteries might be addressed, the battery remains inoperable without the silver required for its electrical contacts. Similarly, the silicon supply for computer chips can be secured, but the chip itself becomes inert without the silver used for its bonding wires. This executive order signaled the commencement of a new era of industrial policy, wherein the government is no longer deferring to the free market for supply. Instead, it is actively identifying strategic vulnerabilities, and silver represents a significant deficiency in this strategy. Since the issuance of this order, the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense have initiated comprehensive data collection efforts, mapping every mine and smelter, and compiling lists that individuals would prefer not to be associated with. Thus, when a shortage materializes, does the military resort to online bidding platforms for silver coins? No. It invokes the Defense Production Act of 1950. This legislation, enacted during the Korean War, bestows upon the President broad authority to regulate the nation's industrial infrastructure. While recently utilized for issues such as baby formula and ventilator production, its original intent was wartime mobilization. Specifically, Title III of the DPA grants the government the power to prioritize and allocate materials essential for national defense and to incentivize the expansion of production capacity and supply. In practical terms, imagine Raytheon requiring 10,000 ounces of silver to produce a batch of Tomahawk missiles, but the market is exceedingly tight, with no silver available at the refinery. The President then invokes the DPA. A directive is dispatched to the refinery, stating, "You are hereby mandated to fulfill Raytheon's order before any other commercial orders. It is immaterial if Apple was the next in line, or if the U.S. Mint was scheduled to receive Silver Eagles from you. The military bypasses all other cues. Apple must wait. You must wait. The military takes precedence. This creates a crowding out effect. During a shortage, available supply is not allocated based on price, but rather on priority ratings. The military holds the highest rating, while the civilian economy has the lowest. Consequently, during a crisis, the shelves of bullion dealers will become barren, not due to a lack of silver, but because that silver has been legally allocated to strategic industries by federal mandate. You are unable to purchase what the government has already claimed. To be more specific, the Department of Commerce oversees the Defense Priorities and Allocation System, DPS. Contracts are assigned priority ratings, DU or DX. A DU rating signifies high priority, while a DX rating denotes the highest national priority. DX orders must be fulfilled before DU orders, and DU orders must be satisfied before unrated orders. If tensions escalate in the Pacific or drone warfare intensifies in Europe, the Pentagon will begin assigning DX ratings to silver procurement contracts. For instance, a DX rating would be applied to silver acquisition for the Patriot missile system. This imposes a legal obligation on the supplier. Any refiner that disregards a DX order to sell to a private customer faces criminal penalties and imprisonment. Therefore, to whom will they prioritize sales? Naturally, to the Pentagon. This constitutes a form of indirect confiscation. The government does not need to conduct home invasions to seize silver coins. That approach is cumbersome and politically unpopular. Instead, they intercept the flow at its source, commandeering the output of refineries and mines. By shutting off the tap at the origin, the retail market dries up. Premiums on existing coins skyrocket, and the street price diverges from the official price. However, acquiring new metal becomes impossible, as every newly produced ounce bears a DX designation. Now, for the investor, this presents a bullish scenario. The US government acknowledges its error in liquidating the strategic stockpile. Discussions are underway in Washington regarding replenishment, recognizing the necessity of a buffer. While perhaps not the 3 billion ounces of the past, a strategic energy and defense reserve of perhaps 500 million ounces might be required. Imagine the US government entering the market as a buyer, needing to acquire 500 million ounces. Global annual production stands at only 830 million ounces. This would equate to an attempt to purchase 60% of the world's annual output. If this initiative were publicly announced, the price of silver would surge to $100 overnight. Consequently, such a program would likely be executed discreetly, employing opaque financial mechanisms and potentially utilizing the Exchange Stabilization Fund, with purchases made through intermediaries in London and Switzerland. This strategy would establish a substantial, albeit unseen, price floor. Every time the price of silver declines, an anonymous buyer would emerge. Recall the whale mentioned in our previous video series. What if that whale is not a technology corporation, but rather the Department of Defense attempting to rectify a 30-year miscalculation? This represents the ultimate hedge for silver. The entity with the capacity to print money requires a finite physical asset. They can generate unlimited dollars to acquire limited silver. As an investor, the prudent strategy is to anticipate this move, acquiring the asset that the government must purchase to maintain its military's operational readiness. Therefore, while the government possesses the legal authority to seize supply and the motivation to hoard, a significant challenge exists. The silver is not located within the United States. Domestic silver mining is minimal. The majority originates from Mexico, Peru, and China. The Defense Production Act is only applicable to entities operating under U.S. jurisdiction. The president cannot compel a mine in China to expedite shipments to the United States. In Part 3, we will explore the geopolitical dimensions of resource extraction, examining the U.S. effort to establish a mineral NATO and the pressure exerted on Canada and Mexico to secure the North American supply chain. We will also address the risk of resource nationalism from the Pentagon's perspective, considering the possibility that Mexico might choose to retain its silver, presenting a significant problem for the U.S. military. Could the U.S. intervene militarily for silver, or stage a coup for copper? Historical precedents suggest that such actions are not beyond the realm of possibility. The current crisis extends beyond mere commodity acquisition. It involves control over the very earth from which these materials are extracted. Please stay tuned for Part 3. We are examining the map of the silver conflict. If you have been following this briefing, you understand the critical nature of the situation. In Part 1, we revealed that the United States military possesses no strategic silver reserves whatsoever. In Part 2, we investigated the Defense Production Act, the legislation empowering the president to seize silver from domestic refineries. However, this strategy contains a fundamental vulnerability, a flaw so apparent that it causes sleepless nights for military leaders. The Defense Production Act terminates at the border. While the President of the United States can direct a factory in Ohio to comply with any order, they cannot compel a mine in Mexico to increase its output, nor can they order a smelter in Peru to divert shipments to New York instead of Shanghai. Crucially, they cannot instruct a Chinese-owned mine in Africa to supply the U.S. Navy. The stark reality is that the United States consumes significantly more silver than it produces domestically. Our reliance on imports for nearly 80% of our silver supply positions us as a client state for the very metal that fuels our advanced weaponry. In Part 3, we will delve into the geopolitics of resource extraction, exploring Washington's concerted effort to forge a mineral NATO, an alliance of like-minded nations dedicated to securing supply chains. We will examine the precarious situation with Mexico, the world's largest silver producer, which is contemplating the nationalization of its resources. And we will confront the uncomfortable question: In a critical scenario, would the United States initiate a coup to secure vital silver supplies? History suggests a positive answer. The conflict over silver is not merely an economic one, it is fundamentally a conflict over territory. Let us consider the statistics. According to the United States Geological Survey, the U.S. mines approximately 1,000 metric tons of silver annually, yet our consumption nears 5,000 metric tons. This creates an annual deficit of 4,000 tons. This shortfall is met through imports from countries such as Mexico, Canada, Poland, and Peru. For the past 30 years, we have operated under the assumption that this flow of resources was guaranteed, believing that free trade inherently ensured secure trade. We ratified agreements like NAFTA and other trade pacts, confident that financial transactions would resolve all logistical challenges. However, in an era of resource constraints, the power of money diminishes. If Mexico exhausts its silver reserves or decides to retain them domestically, the United States cannot artificially generate silver. It must be imported. This renders the U.S. military strategically vulnerable to a supply blockade. Should a hostile nation, such as China, acquire control of the source of supply in South America, or if a pandemic were to disrupt port operations, the U.S. defense industrial base would face severe depletion within months. We are dependent on foreign silver, and the supplier is beginning to dictate terms. Washington is acutely aware of this dependency. This led to the establishment of the Mineral Security Partnership in 2022 by the State Department. Consider this initiative as a NATO for metals encompassing the United States, Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and various European nations. The objective is straightforward: friend-shoring, the creation of supply chains that exclude adversarial nations like China and Russia. The plan involves extracting silver in Mexico, processing it in Canada, and transforming it into batteries in the United States. This strategy appears sound, but a significant challenge exists. The multilateral partnership, referred to as the MSP, is essentially a consortium of consumers. The majority of its members are nations requiring this vital metal, not those possessing it. Countries rich in this resource, such as Mexico, Peru, Chile, and Bolivia, are not entirely supportive. They observe this alliance, which resembles a mineral-focused NATO, and question the rationale for supplying their precious resources at a reduced rate, essentially allowing their wealth to be channeled into bolstering another nation's green initiatives. This disparity breeds considerable tension. The United States aims to establish a self-contained economic sphere, but its defenses are weakening as developing nations demand more equitable terms. This brings us to the pivotal nation in this silver standoff: Mexico. Mexico stands as the world's preeminent silver producer, a title it has held for centuries, akin to Saudi Arabia's standing in the oil market. Approximately a quarter of all silver extracted globally originates from Mexican territory. A substantial portion of this silver is destined for the United States. However, a discernible shift in Mexico's political landscape is occurring. Recent administrations have championed a policy of resource nationalism, exemplified by the nationalization of its lithium industry and a moratorium on new open-pit mining permits. Furthermore, they are demanding increased tax revenues and royalty payments from foreign mining corporations. Consider a hypothetical scenario. The price of silver surges to $80 per ounce. The Mexican government, observing the substantial profits reaped by Canadian and American companies operating within its borders, might declare sufficient. They could then implement an export prohibition, mandating that all silver mined in Mexico be refined domestically and prioritized for Mexican industrial needs. Alternatively, they might impose a 90% windfall tax, which would severely disrupt the United States supply chain. A cessation of silver flow from Mexico would leave the United States with no viable alternative sources. While Canada does produce some silver, its output is insufficient to compensate. Poland, though a producer, is geographically distant and situated too close to a region experiencing geopolitical conflict. Mexico possesses significant leverage, and it is fully aware of this fact. In a global environment where the United States requires silver for both its electric vehicle industry and its defense capabilities, Mexico holds a commanding position. We are thus entering a precarious impasse. The United States desperately needs the metal, while Mexico seeks to assert its authority. The question remains: who will concede first? While the United States is forging alliances for supply chain resilience, China has been pursuing a different strategy: the Belt and Road Initiative. For the past 2 decades, Chinese state-owned enterprises have been actively acquiring mining operations in Peru, Bolivia, and across Africa. These acquisitions are often accompanied by substantial infrastructure development, including the construction of roads, ports, and power plants. In return, China secures offtake agreements, granting them the preferential right to the initial shipments of extracted ore. Consequently, even if a mine is located in Peru, if it is owned by a Chinese entity and its output is contractually obligated to a Chinese smelter, the United States is effectively barred from accessing these resources. This represents a sophisticated geopolitical maneuver, with China now controlling not only the processing capabilities, but also the primary sources of these critical minerals. They have effectively established a strong hold over the supply chain within the Western Hemisphere. The Las Bambas mine in Peru, a major source of copper and silver in the Andes, exemplifies this trend, representing Chinese assets situated on Latin American soil. This development constitutes a direct challenge to the Monroe Doctrine, established in 1823, which declared the Western Hemisphere off-limits to further foreign colonization or intervention. Yet China is now demonstrably present within the region, directly involved in mining operations. Should the United States military require silver, and the neighboring mine is under Beijing's ownership, this signifies a critical, strategic vulnerability. Faced with such a predicament, what recourse does a superpower have when cornered? When a vital resource essential for national security is unavailable for purchase, the approach shifts from negotiation to acquisition. Historical precedents warrant examination. In 1953, the United States orchestrated a coup in Iran driven by oil interests. In 1973, the United States supported a coup in Chile due to its copper reserves. In the 21st century, could we witness similar regime change operations instigated by a nation's need for silver? If a government in Latin America were to nationalize its mines and sever the silver supply to the United States, the Central Intelligence Agency and the Pentagon would likely not remain passive. Such an action would be perceived as an act of aggression and labeled a threat to national security. Potential repercussions could include economic sanctions, covert operations aimed at destabilization, or even direct military intervention to secure the mines. While this may sound extreme, consider the Tomahawk missile. Its functionality is critically dependent on silver. Without silver, the missile cannot be deployed. Without the missile, the broader geopolitical structure of the empire is compromised. Therefore, securing access to silver is an existential imperative for the nation's power projection capabilities. This elevated importance imbues silver with a war premium in its pricing. We are not merely observing the interplay of supply and demand. Rather, we are witnessing a dynamic between conflict and peace. Should hostilities erupt over resource control in South America, supply chains would be immediately severed. Shipping insurance costs would skyrocket. Consequently, the price of physical silver within North America would diverge significantly from global market trends. The geopolitical landscape is thus fraught with complexity. Allies are proving unreliable, and adversaries are firmly entrenched. The sole viable solution for the United States is to reinstate what it previously discarded: its strategic reserves. The Pentagon cannot depend on Mexico's goodwill, nor can it rely on just-in-time inventory management. It requires a substantial quantity of silver, securely stored in a Nevada vault under armed protection. An acquisition of 500 million ounces is imperative, and this must be undertaken immediately before any potential conflict escalates. In the upcoming segment, the fourth and final part of this series, we will delve into the restocking initiative. I will illustrate why the Department of Defense is poised to become the preeminent purchaser of silver globally over the next 5 years. We will analyze the clandestine financial mechanisms potentially being employed to accumulate this metal. Finally, I will elucidate the implications of this for you, the individual investor. If the United States government enters the market as a buyer unresponsive to price increases, willing to inject unlimited capital to secure a finite resource, what then becomes the price ceiling? The answer is, there is no ceiling. The military's demand for this metal is imminent. It would be prudent to hold this asset before their purchase orders are issued. Stay tuned for the concluding installment of this crisis analysis. We have arrived at the final chapter of this in-depth examination. We have meticulously traced the silver crisis, from its integral role in the guidance chip of a Tomahawk missile, through the depleted vaults of the Defense Logistics Agency, to the strategic considerations of geopolitical adversaries in the global South. The portrait we have painted is stark. The United States military, arguably the most formidable force on Earth, faces a systemic deficit in a crucial metal essential for its operations. We have divested ourselves of our patrimony, outsourced our processing capabilities, and alienated our suppliers. Now, as geopolitical tensions escalate across Europe and Asia, the Pentagon confronts an empty larder. However, a resolution to this complex puzzle exists. The United States government is unlikely to capitulate. They will not cease missile production due to a silver shortage. Instead, they will act as empires have always done when cornered. They will generate currency and acquire the necessary resources. In the fourth installment, we will explore this restocking initiative. I will demonstrate why the Department of Defense is strategically positioned to become the single largest global purchaser of silver over the next decade. We will examine the opaque financial channels utilized to acquire this metal without unduly influencing public market prices. Finally, I will explain the concept of the infinite bid, illustrating how the government's capacity for unlimited dollar creation establishes an unshakable price floor for silver, impervious to any market manipulation. The military's pursuit of this metal is underway, and your current holdings place you in a unique position. This represents the ultimate verdict. Let us quantify the effort required to rectify this situation. During the 1950s, the United States maintained reserves of 3 billion ounces. While that magnitude may not be necessary today, military strategists estimate a minimum 3-year supply buffer is required. This buffer ensures that in the event of an armed conflict disrupting global trade, domestic industries can maintain operations for 36 months. The United States defense sector consumes approximately 20 to 30 million ounces of silver annually. A 3-year buffer would thus necessitate roughly 100 million ounces. However, if the energy transition is also considered within the scope of national security, this requirement escalates to 500 million ounces. Therefore, the target is 500 million ounces. The question arises, where will the government source this quantity? Global mine production currently stands at 830 million ounces. If the United States government attempted to acquire 500 million ounces through open market purchases, it would necessitate buying 60% of the world's annual silver output. Alternatively, it would involve acquiring 100% of the silver held in registered exchange vaults 10 times over. The sheer scarcity of available metal makes such an approach unfeasible. Consequently, a gradual, systematic, and persistent acquisition strategy is required. This creates a sustained demand, or permanent bid. Envision a buyer consistently purchasing 1 million ounces daily, irrespective of the prevailing price, whether it is $30, $50, or $100 per ounce. This buyer is indifferent to technical market indicators, focused solely on replenishing their reserves. This is the essence of the restocking event, effectively constricting market supply for other participants. One might reasonably assume that such significant government purchasing would be publicly evident, reflected in budgetary allocations. However, this is not necessarily the case. The United States Treasury operates a discrete fund known as the Exchange Stabilization Fund, established in 1934. This fund possesses substantial discretionary authority and can engage in transactions involving gold, foreign currencies, and other financial instruments to maintain the stability of the dollar. It operates independently of the congressional budget process and is not obligated to disclose its daily trading activities. If the National Security Council identifies silver as a strategic risk, they can utilize the Exchange Stabilization Fund to covertly acquire the metal. Direct purchases of silver futures on registered exchanges would be too conspicuous. Instead, they would employ intermediaries, such as bullion banks like JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs, to procure physical metal in London or Switzerland on their behalf. The acquired metal would then be stored in private vaults. While the official records might indicate private ownership, the ultimate beneficiary would be the United States government. This explains the presence of significant, often unexplained, large-scale buyers in the market, colloquially referred to as whales, who consistently absorb price dips without selling. The reason such entities might never sell is that they are not typical hedge funds. Rather, they represent strategic reserves. Strategic reserves are not intended for trading. They are meant for safekeeping. It is plausible that we are already witnessing the nascent stages of this accumulation process. The depletion observed in the vaults of the London Bullion Market Association and other registered exchanges is likely not solely attributable to individual retail investors acquiring coins. It is more probably indicative of the steady, discrete return of sovereign buyers to the market. This leads us to the economic principle of the infinite bid. As an individual investor, your purchasing capacity is constrained by your budget. If silver reaches $500 per ounce, you may be unable to acquire more. Similarly, industrial entities operate within budgetary limitations. If silver becomes prohibitively expensive, companies like Apple might seek to reduce their consumption. However, the government, through its control of the Federal Reserve, possesses a virtually limitless supply of dollars. Contrast this with silver, a finite commodity, forged in stellar explosions and requiring extraction from the earth. When an entity with infinite monetary resources pursues an asset with a finite supply, the price has no discernible upper limit. If Raytheon, for instance, quotes a price of $200 per ounce for silver to the Pentagon, the cost of missile production increases. Does the Pentagon then halt missile production? Unlikely. They will absorb the additional cost. Congress will authorize supplementary funding, the Federal Reserve will inject capital, and the transaction will proceed. This renders the military a price-inelastic buyer, meaning their purchasing decisions are not significantly influenced by price fluctuations. They will pay any amount to secure the necessary metal. This creates an unshakable floor for the market. Even in the event of an economic downturn or a stock market collapse, the military will continue to purchase silver, as wartime economies are not susceptible to recession. In fact, they can be the catalyst for economic contraction. In such a scenario, silver's value transcends that of gold. While gold may be stored, silver is instrumental in achieving victory. Consequently, as the government intensifies its purchasing, prices will rise. What does this portend for you, the civilian market participant? We risk being marginalized. As the military secures its supply, less will be available for the private sector. The United States Mint serves as an early indicator of this trend. By law, the Mint is mandated to produce American Silver Eagle coins to meet public demand. However, in recent years, frequent announcements of allocations or sales halts have become commonplace. The reason cited is an insufficient supply of silver blanks. If the Department of Defense invokes the Defense Production Act, refiners will prioritize supplying silver to defense contractors like Raytheon over the United States Mint. This would halt the production of silver eagles and private silver bars. Retailers' websites will display sold out, not due to low prices, but because the metal has been effectively nationalized at the refinery level. This will precipitate a substantial divergence between official prices and actual market accessibility. The official price might be $70, but the metal will be unobtainable. If you wish to acquire silver, you will be relegated to the secondary market, purchasing from another individual who is acutely aware of your limited alternatives and will thus command a premium price, perhaps $150. This constitutes a civilian lockout. The window of opportunity to exchange paper currency for strategic metal is currently open. However, as the restocking initiative gains momentum, this window will rapidly close. The government will not be inclined to share its acquired resources. In summary, this investigation has yielded several critical findings. Firstly, the United States military is profoundly reliant on silver for a wide array of applications, from missile systems to satellite technology. Secondly, the United States government has liquidated its entire strategic silver stockpile, leaving the nation without a critical buffer. Thirdly, adversarial nations control their own refining capacities and are actively stockpiling this metal. Fourthly, our former suppliers are exhibiting increasingly hostile and nationalistic tendencies regarding resource control. Fifthly, the only conceivable solution involves the United States government engaging in large-scale silver acquisition, financed through monetary expansion. For the investor, the conclusion is clear. Silver is not merely a speculative asset. It is a geopolitical imperative. You are in possession of an asset essential for the survival and functioning of the empire. The empire has been remiss, neglecting to secure adequate reserves. Now a sense of urgency prevails. They will enter the market with trillions of dollars in purchasing power. You, however, have a head start, owning the metal before any executive order is signed or the Defense Production Act is invoked. This places you in an exceptionally advantageous position, effectively front-running the Pentagon, the Green New Deal initiatives, and the inevitable global remilitarization of economies. Do not be deterred by short-term price fluctuations. Do not be concerned if the price drops by 50 cents tomorrow. Focus on the underlying realities, the necessity of missiles, the emptiness of the vaults, and the global geopolitical map. The fundamental dynamics of conflict dictate higher silver prices. And ultimately, physics prevails. The United States military has depleted its silver reserves. Ensure you are not left without.